Daddy said the baby isn't his. It's Uncle David's fault. Tommy's whisper hit like a bullet. 1 week after his terrified call, Mommy's baby is coming. Help. My sister lay unconscious in a hospital bed. 8 months pregnant with a child Mark now swore wasn't his. But it wasn't just betrayal. It was character assassination, weaponized through a 4-year-old's voice. And while Mark was out poisoning friends, filing for custody, and spreading lies I couldn't unhear, I was digging. Because the moment I saw those consulting fees draining Sarah's account, I knew something he didn't. He was about to meet a man who documents everything, and the trap he set for me, it's about to snap on him. My name is David Rourke, and I'm 45 years old. My evenings are quiet affairs of microwave dinners and paperwork, but my weekends belong to my nephew Tommy, teaching him the art of fishing. The cedar-scented garage is our sanctuary, where his small hands learn to sort lures in my old tackle box. My sister Sarah married Mark Thompson, a contractor whose charm never quite reached his eyes, and whose business invoices always seemed to arrive conveniently late. I stayed silent for Sarah's sake, but my years managing construction budgets taught me to document everything. Every transaction, every conversation, filed away with timestamps and backups. Mark laughs at my meticulous nature, calling it old-fashioned paranoia. Behind Sarah's bright smile, I catch glimpses of strain, while Mark's practiced confidence seems to crack at the edges. But let me start from the beginning. I'd just settled into my recliner with a stack of invoices when my phone lit up with Tommy's picture. It was 11:42 p.m., way past his bedtime. My chest tightened as I answered. Uncle David. Tommy's voice was thin, frightened. Mommy's baby is coming. Help! My mind stuttered. Baby? What baby? Sarah hadn't said anything about being pregnant. Where's your mom, buddy? On the kitchen floor. His breath hitched between words. She won't get up. I was already shoving my feet into work boots, not bothering with the laces. Is your dad there? No. Please come. The tremor in his voice drove straight through me. I'm on my way. Stay on the phone. With me, okay? Keys in hand, I rushed to my truck. The engine roared to life, and I pulled out of my driveway like there were demons on my tail. Keep talking, Tommy. Is your mom awake? Her eyes are closed. His words dissolved into hiccups. I'm coming, buddy. 5 minutes. I ran 2 red lights, the empty intersections blinking accusation. Sarah's townhouse was exactly 4.7 miles away. I'd measured it once, planning the shortest route to their place. Funny how the mind fixates on details when panic's breathing down your neck. 3 minutes later, I pulled up to their curved driveway. Tommy must have been watching because the front door flew open before I could knock. He stood there in Pokemon pajamas, clutching his favorite T-Rex plush, tears cutting clean tracks down his cheeks. Kitchen, he pointed. Sarah lay crumpled near the breakfast bar, one arm stretched toward her dropped phone. Her face was ghost pale. Dark hair fanned across the tile. My fingers found her pulse, thready, but there. Her breathing was shallow. Too shallow. I pulled out my phone, punched 911. Medical emergency, 1247 Oakwood Lane. Had to repeat it twice because my voice kept cracking. Pregnant woman unconscious, breathing but unresponsive. While rattling off details to dispatch, I scooped Sarah up. She felt lighter than I remembered, and carried her to the entrance hallway where paramedics could reach her easily. Tommy hovered nearby. Dinosaur squeezed tight against his chest. They're coming, buddy. I wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Your mom's gonna be okay. We waited at the curb, counting emergency sirens like heartbeats. Red and white lights painted the neighborhood in urgent strokes. The paramedics worked fast, efficient, asking questions I barely had answers for. No, I didn't know how far along she was. No, I couldn't reach her husband. Yes, I was family, her brother. They loaded Sarah onto a stretcher. One paramedic, young guy with kind eyes, told me they were heading to County General. I got Tommy settled in my truck, his car seat still anchored where I'd left it last weekend's fishing trip. The dinosaur rode shotgun. The hospital parking lot was a maze of painted lines gone fuzzy in the dark. I parked crooked hands, slick on the wheel. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed against institutional beige walls, while a registrar peppered me with questions. Next of kin details, insurance information, contact numbers. I kept Tommy close, distracting him with apple juice from a vending machine that needed 3 tries to accept my crumpled dollar. My eyes never left those heavy double doors where they'd wheeled Sarah through. The waiting room chairs were hard plastic, designed to keep you alert, keep you worried. An hour crawled by. Tommy dozed against my arm, dinosaur tucked under his chin. The wall clock ticked loud enough to count heartbeats by. Finally, A nurse in blue scrubs pushed through those doors, clipboard in hand. Thompson family? I stood, careful not to wake Tommy. Here, I'm her brother. She consulted her clipboard, looking between me and the sleeping boy. Your sister is stable. She's asking for you. The nurse's face softened as she led me down the corridor. Tommy still sleeping in my arms. Your sister's stable but exhausted. She's about 34 weeks along. Did you know about the pregnancy? My steps faltered. 34 weeks. 8 months. The timeline ricocheted through my head like a stray bullet. No, this is the first I'm hearing about it. She gave me a careful look but kept walking. We've tried reaching her. Husband at the numbers listed. No response yet. Yeah, that sounds about right, I muttered, shifting Tommy's weight. The dinosaur's plastic tail dug into my ribs. In the harsh fluorescent light, my mind flipped through recent memories like a deck of cards. Sarah in loose sweaters at Sunday dinners, always sitting behind the table. Cancelled swimming lessons with Tommy, the way she'd hug sideways, keeping distance between us. Christ, how had I missed it? You ever have one of those moments where your world tilts sideways and suddenly all the little oddities click into place? This was mine. The nurse stopped at a computer station. We'll need some insurance information verified. I can show you her patient portal. I've got access, I said, easing Tommy onto a nearby chair. She added me as a backup contact last year. While the nurse checked vitals, I pulled up Sarah's portal on my phone. Right away, something caught my eye. A series of autodrafts labeled consulting retainer, hitting her account every 2 weeks. $5,000 each time. The amounts made my stomach clench. I'd managed enough construction budgets to know when numbers didn't add up. I made a mental note to pull her full statements later. Sometimes paper trails tell stories people won't. Back in the waiting area, Tommy stirred. Where's Mommy? She's resting, buddy. I smoothed his hair back. How about we get some pancakes from the cafeteria later, with extra syrup? He nodded against my shoulder, clutching his dinosaur tighter. Is the baby okay? The question caught me off guard. You knew about the baby? Daddy said not to tell. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. He said it was a special secret. Before I could process that gut punch, familiar footsteps echoed down the corridor. Expensive shoes, on linoleum, walking like they owned the place. Mark strode in, trailing cologne and impatience, his suit still pressed despite the late hour. Where's my wife? He barely glanced at Tommy. Someone called about complications? I stood slowly, keeping my voice level for Tommy's sake. She's stable. Where have you been? Business dinner. He straightened his cuffs. Unlike some people, I can't drop everything for drama. Drama? My jaw clenched. Your 8 months pregnant wife collapsed. Complications, he cut in, waving off my concern like lint on his sleeve. These things happen. Anyway, I've got an early flight tomorrow. Important meetings in Phoenix. A nurse appeared with admission forms. Mark signed without reading, his pen scratching quick loops across the paper. When she offered him a visitor bracelet, he pocketed it instead of putting it on. Tell Sarah I'll call when I land. He was already turning away, phone in hand. Handle this, will you? You're good with paperwork. The corridor door swung shut behind him just as a monitor alarm chirped somewhere down the hall. I stood there, Tommy's small hand in mine, watching the space where Mark had been. Remember what I said about silence having a price? Standing in that sterile hallway, breathing in antiseptic and fear, I was starting to calculate the cost. Tommy tugged my sleeve. Uncle David, can I have pancakes now? I squeezed his hand gently. Sure, buddy. Let's go find those pancakes. You know that feeling when you're driving and spot black ice ahead? That moment of clarity when you know things are about to get real slippery, real fast. That's exactly where I was, watching storm clouds gather while everyone else was still calling it partly cloudy. I caught up with Mark by the vending machines, the hum of fluorescent lights making his face look waxy and unreal. A coffee cup dangled from his manicured fingers, probably from that business dinner he'd mentioned. We need to talk about Sarah's accounts, I said, keeping my voice low. No need to give the night shift more drama. He took a leisurely sip. Do we? Those consulting retainers. $5,000 every 2 weeks. That's her retirement savings you're draining. You know that smirk some men get when they think they're the smartest guy in the room? Mark had it down to an art. It's called seed capital, David. He pronounced my name like it was something stuck to his shoe. Some of us actually build businesses instead of pushing paper for others. I'd spent enough years reviewing contractor invoices to smell bull from a mile away. Funny thing about seed capital, usually comes with paperwork, contracts, business plans. Not everyone needs to document every little thing. He checked his phone, thumb scrolling. Some of us operate on trust. That word, trust, hit me like a slap. I thought about Sarah unconscious on her kitchen floor, Tommy clutching his dinosaur. 8 months of secrets. Trust works both ways, I said. So does documentation. Those withdrawals, the timing of this pregnancy, the lies, it all gets audited. Something flickered behind his eyes. Quick, like a card. Players tell. Maybe you should worry less about my marriage. He straightened his tie. Sarah and I have been discussing separation anyway. The casual way he dropped that bomb made my fingers itch to grab his collar. But violence would only prove whatever story he was spinning. Her savings belong to her, I said, keeping my voice steady. Remember that. He shrugged, already turning away. We'll see what the lawyers say. I walked back to Tommy, my mind churning through next steps. Pull bank statements. Contact Sarah's old accountant. Document every conversation, starting with tonight. Uncle David? Tommy tugged my sleeve as I reached him. Yeah, buddy? He glanced toward where Mark had disappeared, then leaned close like he was sharing a secret. His next words hit me like a shotgun blast. Daddy said the baby isn't his. It's Uncle David's fault. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My throat went desert dry. In 8 words, Mark had laid his trap, turning my sister's pregnancy into a weapon, twisting family bonds into something dirty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while my world imploded. Everything I'd built, my reputation, my place in the family, my basic dignity as a man, punctured by a child's whispered poison. I crouched down to Tommy's level, forcing my hands to stay steady. Looking into his confused eyes, I saw Mark's real target. This wasn't just about discrediting me. He was reshaping his son's reality, piece by piece. Tommy, I said carefully, you're safe with me. You know that, right? He nodded, but his fingers twisted anxiously in his shirt. Good. I kept my voice gentle, even as rage burned in my gut. That's what matters right now. I guided him back to his chair, noting the time on my phone. 11:42 p.m. Details matter when you're building a case, and this moment, this calculated cruelty delivered through a child's innocence, would definitely be part of the record. Down the hall, Mark's expensive shoes clicked against linoleum, fading away like a monster in a fairy tale. But I knew better. Real monsters don't vanish when the story ends. They just switch tactics. The vending machine hummed beside us, its light casting strange shadows. Tommy leaned against my arm. His dinosaur clutched tight while I listened to my sister's monitors beep steady rhythms through the wall. The next morning hit like a hangover, though I hadn't touched a drop. You ever walk into a room and feel the conversation die? That's what greeted me in the hospital waiting area. 3 women from Sarah's street, the morning power walking crew, huddled near the coffee station. Their whispers dried up when I stepped through the automatic doors, replaced by the kind of looks you give something stuck to your shoe. Karen Mitchell, president of the Homeowners Association and chief gossip distributor, actually clutched her pearls. I'm not making that up. Real pearls, real clutching, like some black and white movie scene. David, she said, voice dripping with false concern. We're all just devastated for Sarah. Such a difficult time. My phone buzzed. Text from Mike, my fishing buddy of 15 years. Hey man, maybe hold off on this weekend. Lot going on. That's when it hit me. Mark had been busy. While I'd spent the night watching Tommy sleep in a waiting room chair, that snake had been poisoning the well. One call at a time, one carefully crafted story spreading through our social circle like ink in water. The coffee machine gurgled and sputtered, filling the awkward silence. I could almost hear Mark's version playing in their heads. Poor Sarah, led astray by her controlling brother. The affair that never happened. The baby that wasn't his. Another buzz. Steve from my softball team. Taking a break from league nights. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. Right. Just my reputation being gutted. One text at a time. Remember how I mentioned keeping records? Thank God for that habit. I pulled out my phone and started screenshots. Every message, every timestamp. Evidence doesn't care about gossip. At noon sharp, a courier found me. You know it's never good news when someone makes you sign for an envelope. Inside, legal papers, fresh from Mark's lawyer. Sole custody petition for Tommy. Temporary orders hearing in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The timeline hit me like a physical weight. Mark hadn't just been spreading rumors, he'd been laying groundwork. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance was building toward this moment. I leaned against the wall, reading through pages of legal jargon that basically said I was unfit to be near my own nephew. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, same as last night. but now they felt like countdown timers. Sarah was awake when I visited her room. Pale but alert, monitors still tracking everything. I stuck to facts. Doctor's updates, Tommy's breakfast, pediatric schedules. No need to dump Mark's poison into her recovery. The baby's measurements are good, I said, checking my notes. They want to monitor blood pressure for another day. David. She started to say something, then stopped. The silence stretched. You ever notice how hospital rooms smell like fear trying to hide behind antiseptic? I breathed through my mouth and waited. People are saying things, she finally managed. I know. I kept my voice steady. We'll handle it with facts, documentation. Truth has a way of surfacing. But even as I said it, I felt time slipping. Mark had momentum, social pressure, legal machinery, everything moving his way while we played defense. In the elevator heading down, I pulled out my phone again, scrolled to John's number, my old army buddy, now retired from JAG Corps. 20 years of handling military justice had given him a nose for liars. I typed, "Need your help. Family situation, legal ambush." My thumb hovered over send. Last time I'd called in a favor from John was after Desert Storm, when nightmares had us both reaching for the bottle. He'd stayed straight while I wobbled, then pulled me back to solid ground. The elevator dinged for the lobby. Through the opening doors, I could see Karen and her pearls holding court with a fresh audience. More neighbors, more whispers, more damage to contain. I hit send. I barely tasted the protein bar I forced down for dinner. My apartment felt too quiet, like those moments before a storm when even the birds know to shut up. The kitchen sink was full of coffee mugs. I'd lost count somewhere after cup 6 or 7. You know those nights when washing dishes feels like climbing Everest? Yeah, it was one of those. The living room window faced Sarah's street. From my chair, I could see Karen Mitchell's house lit up like a theater. Shadows moving behind curtains. Probably another emergency HOA meeting. Nothing brings out the vultures like fresh drama, right? My hand kept drifting to my phone, thumbing through old photos. Tommy's first fish, a tiny bluegill that made him grin like he'd caught Moby Dick. Sarah's graduation, before Mark, when her smile reached her eyes. Good memories that suddenly felt like evidence of something that never happened. Maybe? I thought. Watching headlights crawl past my window, the smart play was to back off. Let Mark have his victory lap. Keep my distance until the gossip died down. Sarah would recover, Tommy would adjust, and I'd be the uncle who visits on holidays. Clean break. Minimal splash. The phone lit up. John's name on the screen hit like a lifeline. "Tell me the problem," he said. Voice like gravel in a coffee grinder. "Then tell me the deadline." I leaned back, closed my eyes. Remember Mark? Sarah's husband? The contractor. Slick suit. Weak handshake. He's poisoning everyone against me. Says I'm the father of Sarah's baby. Filed for sole custody of Tommy. 6 weeks until the hearing. Evidence beats theater, John said. Simple. Solid. Like everything about him. You still keep those detailed records? Every receipt. Every email. Good. I'm in town. Meet me at Dawn's Diner. 6 a.m. Bring your laptop and that steel trap memory of yours. Dawn's was our old hangout, back when we both needed breakfast to chase away combat dreams. The coffee still tasted like motor oil filtered through gym socks. But it kept you breathing. John showed up with legal pads and a portable printer that looked military surplus old. His hair had gone full silver, but his eyes were sharp as ever. 6 weeks, he said, drawing a timeline. Work backward. What do we need? I started listing. Bank statements, contracts, vendor invoices. John added legal terms I barely understood. Subpoenas, declarations, service requirements. Mark's playing social chess, John said, making notes in precise capital letters. But paper trails don't care about popularity contests. We broke it down into weekly targets. John knew exactly how long each legal move would take, right down to the hours. The timeline felt tight but possible. Your edge was always documentation, he reminded me. Time to sharpen it into a blade. I opened my laptop, pulled up Sarah's account access, started saving statements as PDFs, naming files with timestamps that could stand up in court. Each download felt like loading ammunition. See this pattern? I pointed to repeated withdrawals, all tagged as business expenses. Mark's been bleeding her accounts for months. John's pen moved faster. Paper trail. Beautiful. Now show me the contracts. The diner started filling up with the breakfast crowd. Karen Mitchell walked in, saw us huddled over documents, and practically sprinted to her usual booth, probably calling emergency backup on her pearls. I didn't care. For the first time since Tommy's call, I felt solid ground under my feet. The path forward wasn't about winning a popularity contest. It was about building an evidence wall so high even Mark's charm couldn't climb over it. John tapped his legal pad. Focus on what we can prove. Dates, dollars, documents. Let Mark waste energy on his soap opera. We're writing a different kind of story. The morning sun hit the diner windows, painting our paperwork gold. I thought about Tommy's fishing rod, still propped in my garage. About Sarah in that hospital bed, trying to be brave. About Mark, probably practicing his concerned husband act in some mirror. I clicked save on another statement PDF. The timestamp blinked. 7:43 a.m. One more brick in the wall of truth. Ever try putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle in the dark? That's what combing through Sarah's bank records felt like at first. But here's the thing about numbers. They don't lie, even when people do. I'd cleared my kitchen table, spread out months of statements like a paper tablecloth. The coffee maker gurgled in the background, keeping me company through the morning hours. Funny how comfort sounds change when you're hunting lies. Even the tick of my wall clock felt like it was counting down evidence. The first red flag jumped out around 10 a.m. Consulting fees. Always on weekends. Always when Sarah would have been home with Tommy. 2,000 here, 3,000 there. Regular as church bells, but wrong as sin. You know that feeling. When you spot something off, and suddenly your brain starts connecting dots you didn't even know were there? That hit me as I pulled up Mark's client invoices on my laptop. Same descriptions, word for word. But the numbers didn't match Sarah's transfers. And those signatures? Something about them made my skin crawl. I dug out my old lightbox from the garage, still dusty from my last blueprint review, laid the invoices on top of each other, and there it was. Whole blocks of text, perfectly aligned. Like Mark had played copy-paste with paper and ink. My hands were steady as I dialed Pete Davidson's number. He'd been supplying lumber to my sites for 15 years, never missed a delivery. Pete, quick question about that March shipment to Mark's Cedar Grove project? What shipment? Pete's voice had that confused edge. We haven't delivered to Cedar Grove since last fall. I thanked him, hung up, and started writing. Clean, clear memo language. The kind that makes lawyers smile and judges nod. No emotion, just facts. Dates, dollars, discrepancies. Each paragraph another nail in Mark's coffin. You ever notice how evidence has its own kind of beauty? Like watching a photograph develop in darkroom chemicals. The truth just keeps getting sharper, clearer, until you can't look away. I photographed everything twice. Once with my phone, once with my actual camera. Created 2 encrypted folders on different drives. Paranoid maybe, but I've seen too many computer problems wreck solid cases. The timeline came last. 3 columns. Date, transaction, what smelled wrong. Simple enough for a 5th grader to follow, detailed enough to stand up in court. No theater, no accusations, just connect the dots that even Mark couldn't talk his way around. The binder came together like a book of revelation. Blue tabs for bank records, red for invoices, yellow for correspondence. I labeled it forgeries in clean block letters. Professional, inevitable. My phone felt heavy when I picked it up to text John. Just 3 words. Round 1 ready. The kitchen clock showed 6:43 p.m. I took my red Sharpie and circled next week on the calendar hanging by the fridge. Week 2. Time to speed this train up. Right then, the smell of my coffee maker's auto-clean cycle hit my nose. That sharp vinegary blast that means it's purging itself. Seemed fitting somehow. Some things need to be cleaned out completely before they can work right again. Ever try following a trail of breadcrumbs through a hurricane? That's what asset tracing feels like. Good thing I'm stubborn. And good thing corporate records are public domain. The next morning found me hunched over my laptop. 3rd coffee going cold beside me. Those suspect invoices had company names I'd never heard of. Silverleaf Solutions, LLC. Parkway Ventures Group. Cedar Heights Management. Fresh paint on empty buildings, every one of them. I'll tell you something about shell companies. They're like those Russian nesting dolls. Open one up, there's always another one inside. But even empty shells leave paper trails. The state's corporate registry website hadn't changed much since my contracting days. Same clunky interface, same $5 per search fee. But now those fees felt like buying lottery tickets. Except every ticket was a winner. Each search revealed another connection, another breadcrumb. Remember when you joke about me being too careful with paperwork? I muttered to my reflection in the computer screen. The old habits were paying off now. Every new LLC registration had timestamps, filing numbers, registered agents, beautiful, boring details that don't lie. By lunch, I had my first real breakthrough. Every single one of these fresh-faced companies traced back to the same management firm, Coastal Business Services. My printer hummed, spitting out registration certificates like playing cards in a poker game. But the real gold was in Sarah's bank statements. Those transfers I'd flagged earlier, they didn't just disappear into thin air. They hopped, first to Silverleaf Solutions account at First National, then, well, that's where it got interesting. You know that feeling when you're fishing and your line suddenly goes taut? That's how it felt when I spotted the international routing number buried in transfer fees and service charges. The money vanished offshore faster than a summer storm over the Atlantic. I grabbed my legal pad and started sketching. Not fancy flowcharts or computer graphics, just simple boxes and arrows. The kind any judge could follow over morning coffee. Money starts here, jumps there, vanishes there. Clean, clear, damning. The documentation had to be bulletproof. I took screenshots of every registry page, complete with timestamps and URLs. Called up a notary I knew from my contracting days, Ellen, who'd witnessed enough signatures to spot a fake from across the room. Need these certified as public records, I told her. Everything by the book. Always is with you, David, she said, stamping each page with satisfying precision. The pieces were falling together like a well-built frame. Mark hadn't just been stealing. He'd been laundering the money through a maze of paper companies. One subpoena to the right bank would crack this thing wide open. Turn his custody play into a fraud investigation. I laid out the exhibits in plain English. No fancy legal terms, no dramatic accusations, just simple headers. Company registration, money transfers, offshore account trail. The truth doesn't need theater to hit hard. The wall clock read 2 a.m. when I finally finished. My neck cracked as I stood up. But my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. I packed everything into my document bag. Waterproof, fireproof, with a combination lock. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd learned the hard way that evidence has a way of disappearing when you need it most. For the first time since Tommy's call, I let myself sleep past dawn. Phone volume maxed out. Document bag right by the door. The pieces were in place. Now we just needed one judge's signature on one subpoena to bring Mark's house of cards tumbling down. Through my bedroom window, I could hear early morning traffic picking up on the main road. Regular people heading to regular jobs. No idea that somewhere in this quiet neighborhood, a man's carefully constructed lies were about to unravel. You ever notice how time speeds up when you're racing towards something, then crawls like molasses during that final stretch? That last week before the hearing felt like both. My dining room table had vanished under stacks of paper, each pile organized with the kind of precision that would have made my old drill sergeant proud. 3 copies of everything. One for the judge, one for opposing counsel, and one for when things went sideways. Because things always go sideways. Hit me again, John said from across the table, playing Mark's attorney with annoying accuracy. What exactly made you suspicious of these transfers? I squared my shoulders, just like we'd practiced. On February 12th, I observed identical descriptions on 2 separate invoices totaling $4,700. The signatures showed obvious signs of digital manipulation. Objection, speculation, John cut in, hiding a grin. Let me rephrase that, I said, reaching for my coffee. The signatures appeared visually inconsistent with known samples from the same time period. Ever tried explaining financial fraud to someone who doesn't want to understand? It's like teaching a cat to fetch. You've got to keep it simple. Keep it concrete. I'd boiled 6 weeks of investigation down to one opening line. This case isn't about custody. It's about $342,000 stolen from my sister through forged documents and hidden accounts. You know what's funny about preparing for court? It's a lot like getting ready for a big construction inspection. Everything has to be labeled. Everything has to be findable in seconds. I had thumb drives marked with clean white labels, exhibits tabbed with color-coded flags, and summaries that could walk a 5th grader through the money trail. Sarah was looking stronger when I visited her that Wednesday. The hospital room had that lived-in feel, with cards on the windowsill and a half-finished crossword by the bed. Her due date was closing in fast, another clock ticking alongside ours. I've got everything lined up, I told her, keeping my voice steady. The judge will see the transfers, the forged contracts, everything. She nodded, one hand resting on her belly. Tommy asks about his dad. We'll sort it out, I said, and meant it. Some promises you make knowing the weight they carry. Thursday morning, I confirmed service with the process server. Mark had been served at his office. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented. The subpoenas would force the banks to produce records right there in court. No delays, no excuses. That last evening, I stood in my backyard watching the sunset paint the sky. The air had that sharp pre-autumn feel, clean and full of possibility. The clock that had been eating away at my peace for 6 weeks was finally running down to zeros. I barely slept that night, kept getting up to check my alarm, touch the documents, make sure everything was still in place. By 4 a.m., I gave up and started my morning routine. Shower, shave, the kind of precise movements that keep your mind from racing ahead. The fire shirt I'd picked out got 3 passes with the iron. Funny how something so ordinary can feel like armor when you're heading into battle. In my pocket, I slipped Tommy's little plastic dinosaur, the one he'd been clutching that night in the kitchen. Not exactly a lucky charm, but something solid to hold on to. The courthouse looked different in the pre-dawn gray, quieter, more serious somehow. Early morning maintenance crews were still buffing the floors as I found Department 4. The bailiff hadn't even posted the docket yet, but I could hear other early arrivals shuffling papers in the hallway. I took my place in line, briefcase at my feet, watching the minute hand tick toward 8 o'clock. 6 weeks of work, all coming down to whatever happened behind those heavy wooden doors. The bailiff appeared with his clipboard, efficient and unreadable as a poker dealer. He started posting the day's schedule, and I felt my pulse quicken as he called out, "Parties in Rourke versus Matthews, check in with the clerk. 6 weeks, 42 days, 1,008 hours since Tommy's call." The clock had finally hit 0. You ever notice how courthouse benches have that specific kind of hard? Not the comfortable kind that reminds you of church pews, but the punishment kind that keeps you alert. I was sitting ramrod straight when Mark strolled in like he owned the place, his attorney matching him stride for stride in what had to be a $1,000 suit. Mark had that look. You know the one. The same look guys get when they think they've rigged the bid process. He'd brought a stack of manila envelopes that his attorney kept tapping like a deck of cards. I didn't need 3 guesses to know what was inside. Probably photos of me and Sarah at family gatherings, carefully selected and cropped to suggest something sinister. Amateur hour stuff, but the kind that can still sting if you're not ready for it. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and we did our choreographed dance to our feet. The judge looked like she'd seen it all before. Probably had. She got right to business, calling me up first. John had prepared me well. Speak clearly, stay on topic, let the evidence do the heavy lifting. "Your Honor," I started, "I'd like to present a timeline of events beginning February 12th of this year." I handed the clerk my first exhibit, tabbed and highlighted exactly where it needed to be. "These are the original bank statements showing duplicate transfers. Ever try to explain a paper trail to someone who hasn't seen it before? You've got to build it brick by brick." I walked through each exhibit like I was teaching someone to read blueprints. Methodical, precise, connecting every dot. Mark's attorney came at me hard on cross, just like we'd expected. "Isn't it true you've always resented my client's success?" "No, sir. My concern is solely with documented financial irregularities. And these frequent visits with your sister, purely familial." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice steady. "Yes, I'm her brother and Tommy's uncle. He tried everything." Implied I was jealous of Mark's business, suggested I had unhealthy attachments, even hinted I was making up the whole fraud angle out of spite. But you can't argue with bank statements and forged signatures. They are what they are. John's redirect was surgical. "Mr. Rourke, what first alerted you to potential financial misconduct?" I held up the forged contract binder. "These duplicate invoices, Your Honor, showing identical work billed twice to different entities." The judge leaned forward, pen moving steadily across her notepad. I could see her pausing at each red tab, comparing dates and amounts. "Your Honor," I said, "we request subpoenas for records from First National Bank and the Corporate Registrar's Office." I slid the pre-prepared orders across to the clerk. "The account numbers and entity names are specifically identified in paragraphs 3 through 7. The judge studied the orders, made a few notes, then nodded. "Granted. Records to be returned by 2 p.m. today." Her face gave away nothing, but her calendar pad showed fresh ink. She was making time for this. Mark's swagger had dimmed a few watts. He was leaning over, whispering urgently to his attorney. Funny how cockiness can evaporate when paperwork starts talking. "We'll reconvene at 2, the judge announced. "Bailiff, clear the courtroom." I waited until Mark and his team filed out before standing. The plastic dinosaur in my pocket pressed against my leg. Tommy's little talisman doing its job. I headed for the hallway phones, already pulling out the service instructions we'd prepared for the subpoenas. John caught my eye as I dialed, giving me that slight nod that said we were on track. The first round was done. Now we just had to wait for the banks to confirm what we already knew. that somewhere in those afternoon records would be the offshore account that would crack this whole thing open. The afternoon sun had turned the courthouse halls into a furnace. I loosened my tie and checked my watch. 1:55. 2 sealed envelopes waited on the clerk's desk. One from County General's lab, the other from First National's records department. You ever notice how time slows down right before the truth hits? Like that moment when you're checking measurements one last time, knowing they'll either confirm your work or reveal a costly mistake. Mark and his attorney huddled by the water fountain, heads close, voices low. They'd spent lunch break making calls. I could tell by the sweat rings under their arms and the way they kept checking their phones. The swagger from this morning was gone, replaced by something tighter, more desperate. The bailiff called us back in at exactly 2. I took my seat, watching the judge scan new paperwork that had landed on her bench. She nodded to the clerk, who activated a video screen showing a woman in a white lab coat, the custodian of records from County General. Mark's attorney shot up like he'd been stung. Your Honor, we object to any DNA evidence as irrelevant and an invasion of privacy. The judge peered over her reading glasses. Counsel, your own petition cites paternity as grounds for sole custody. You opened this door. But, Your Honor, overruled. She turned to the screen. Please proceed. The lab technician held up a manila envelope. These are the results from genetic testing performed on March 3rd, ordered by Mark Wilson during Sarah Wilson's first trimester. She paused, shuffling papers. Mr. Wilson never retrieved these results. I felt my shoulders straighten. March 3rd, that was 5 months ago. Mark had known all along. The chain of custody is documented on page 3, she continued. Samples were collected at 9:15 a.m., sealed, and processed according to standard protocols. Mark's attorney tried again. Your Honor, without proper notice, counsel, the judge cut in. Your client ordered these tests. That's all the notice required. Continue, please. The technician cleared her throat. Comparing the fetal DNA markers to Mr. Wilson's sample, we calculate a 99.99% probability of paternity. The gallery erupted in whispers. I watched Mark's face drain of color as his carefully constructed lie crumbled. His attorney slumped slightly, probably realizing his client had played him too. Furthermore, the technician added, these results were available for pickup on March 10th. Our records show 3 calls attempting to notify Mr. Wilson. The judge's pen scratched across her pad. Thank you. You're excused. The screen went dark. She turned to Mark, her voice sharp as a chisel. Mr. Wilson, this court takes a dim view of discovery games. You had evidence directly relating to your custody petition and chose to withhold it while making serious allegations against others. Mark stared at the table. Temporary orders will issue today. You'll pay support retroactive to filing, secured by a wage assignment. She shuffled papers. We'll address the banking records after a brief recess. I glanced at John, who gave me that slight nod again. The DNA was just the appetizer. Those banking records would be the main course, and Mark knew it. His right jaw muscle twitched like a faulty circuit. The judge stood. 15 minutes. As the bailiff let us out, I couldn't help but think about Tommy's dinosaur in my pocket. Kids have a way of seeing through lies, even when adults think they're being clever. Maybe that's why Tommy had called me that night. He knew who would tell him the truth. The hallway filled with quiet chatter as the gallery filed out. I caught fragments. Knew it all along. And, what about the money? Mark stood alone by the window now, his attorney off making calls. He looked smaller somehow, like a load-bearing wall that's just started to crack. The real fight was coming. The one about missing money and forged contracts. But for now, watching him stare out at nothing, I felt something close to pity. Must be exhausting, carrying around that many lies. John touched my elbow. Ready for round 2? I nodded, feeling the weight of the financial records waiting in that second envelope. Let's finish this. The recess ended with a sharp rap of the gavel. I stood, unfolding the flowchart I'd spent weeks perfecting. Sometimes the simplest tool cuts deepest. Ask any carpenter. Your Honor, my attorney began. We'd like to present evidence regarding the movement of funds from Mrs. Wilson's accounts. The judge nodded. Proceed. I approached with the chart, large enough to read from the gallery but clean as a blueprint. Starting January 15th, a series of transfers moved from Sarah Wilson's primary checking account to this entity. I pointed to the first box. Wilson Consulting LLC, formed 3 days before the first transfer. The judge studied the pattern. I'd arranged it chronologically, each arrow carrying a date and dollar amount. No theater, just mathematics. From there, I continued, funds moved through 3 more shell companies before landing here. My finger traced to the final box. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands, number ending 4471. Mark's attorney jumped up. Objection. Foundation. Your Honor, my counsel responded. We have the registrar's witness ready to authenticate all entity formations. The judge waved toward the door. Bring them in. A woman in a gray suit took the stand, carrying a stack of certified records. She worked for the Secretary of State's office. 20 years handling corporate registrations. One by one, she confirmed each LLC's formation date, registered agent, and managing member. And who signed as managing member for all 5 entities? My attorney asked. Mark Wilson. I watched Mark's fingers drum against the table. Funny how a man's hands can betray him when his face stays still. His attorney tried again. Objection! These business structures are legitimate. Overruled. The judge cut in. Continue. I pulled out the supplier's notarized declaration next. Premier Building Supply confirms no materials were delivered on these dates. I handed it to the clerk. Despite invoices totaling $247,000 charged to Sarah's account, the judge's pen moved steadily now. I could almost see the picture forming in her mind. Not just missing money, but methodical fraud. Your Honor, I said, we ask the court to take judicial notice of these filings and consider referring this matter to appropriate investigators. She set down her pen. Mr. Rourke, these allegations exceed family court jurisdiction. However, she glanced toward the gallery, where 2 men in plain clothes had appeared, notepads already open. It appears the appropriate authorities are aware. Mark's attorney whispered something urgent in his ear. Too late. The damage was mathematical, documented, and witnessed. I caught John's eye across the room. He gave that slight nod again, the one that said, mission accomplished. We'd turned 6 weeks of quiet digging into 30 minutes of public revelation. The judge cleared her throat. Given the scope of these financial concerns, this court will issue referrals to both the district attorney's office and the State Banking Commission. I stood steady, watching truth land like summer lightning. Sudden, bright, and impossible to hide from. The gallery buzzed with whispers. The plainclothes officers scribbled faster. And Mark just stared at his hands, like a man who'd finally run out of stories to tell. The judge's voice cut through the tension like a sharp chisel through soft wood. In light of the evidence presented, this court makes 2 findings. My shoulders squared. 6 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. First, regarding the financial matters, this court will refer Mr. Wilson's conduct to both the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation and the State Banking Commission for regulatory review. The plainclothes officers in the back shifted, pens moving faster. Mark's attorney started shuffling papers, but the judge wasn't finished. Second, regarding custody, the petition for sole custody is denied. Mr. Wilson's visitation with Tommy will be monitored until completion of both restitution and family counseling. I heard Mark inhale sharply. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time, brick by brick, under the fluorescent lights of Department 4. The clerk stood, reading findings into the record. Each point landed like another nail in the coffin of Mark's reputation. Willful misappropriation, systematic fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The words echoed off the wood-paneled walls, while 3 reporters scratched in their notebooks. You know that moment when you've finished a perfect cut on a tough job and everything just fits? This was better. The judge concluded with a final swing of her gavel. Court is adjourned. I gathered my exhibits as the gallery shuffled out. Through the glass doors, I spotted Sarah in the corridor, cradling little Michael. She'd insisted on coming today, despite being just 2 weeks postpartum. Now her eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Peace. It's done, I said simply, joining her. She nodded, adjusting the baby's blanket. I can breathe again. The next few days brought exactly what we'd expected. Local papers ran the story with headlines like "Prominent Contractor Faces Fraud Charges" and "Wilson Construction Under Investigation." Every time someone Googled Mark's name, they'd find those articles first. The dominoes fell fast after that. 3 major clients pulled their contracts by Friday. Mark's phone, usually buzzing with business calls, went quiet. Remember those fancy restaurant managers who used to greet him by name? Now they couldn't seem to find his reservation. A week later, I was hanging Tommy's latest drawing in my home office. The 2 of us on the dock, fishing poles in hand, stick figures done in bright crayon. He'd added something new this time. Baby Michael in a carrier between us. That picture became my compass, reminding me what really mattered. "Uncle David?" Tommy asked from the doorway. "Can we go fishing Saturday?" You bet, buddy. I straightened the frame. Right after we take your mom and Michael to the pediatrician. I'd already scheduled a meeting with Sarah's financial advisor for next week. Time to rebuild her savings, set up college funds, get everything back on solid ground. Not exciting work, but necessary, like laying a proper foundation. Looking at that drawing, I thought about what separated real men from pretenders. It wasn't about winning fights or making noise. It was about showing up, doing the quiet work, protecting what matters. I touched the glass over Tommy's crayon figures and said the only thing that needed saying: a real man protects. He doesn't abandon.